with when you don't have options would be if I get fired and I have no money in my bank account, or if I have enough money for like 3 months to survive, right? Then my options are way low. My ability to pick what I want to do or to make a decision that is beneficial for me has been drastically reduced, right? Or if I'm living paycheck to paycheck and I lose my job, right? I'm not robust because I don't have any savings, and I'm not anti-fragile because I don't have anything to walk right into that's going to be even better. So I'm fragile. I got fired. I was living paycheck to paycheck. Now I can't pay my bills. Okay. So optionality is what allows you to be anti-fragile or robust. And listening to Nassim Taleb, it just made the idea much more clear. And I may not be explaining it that well, but I'm doing the best I can here. So how does this overlap with Gary Vee? Gary Vaynerchuk always talks about, well, there's a few concepts he touches on frequently. One is he tells people they need to be on multiple platforms, right? He tells people they need to be on multiple platforms and not just Facebook and Instagram. You need to be on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever the fuck, all these different things. You need to have an email list, a podcast. He is all over. He's like, you need to be on Twitter. So, but guess what? The thing is, what is the reason for that? He explains it, right? He explains it that it's because, one of those things could disappear tomorrow, or that Instagram one day is going to be MySpace, right? He intuitively understands exactly what Taleb is talking about, which is that to be robust against change or to be anti-fragile, you have to have options. And when Gary Vaynerchuk says you need to be on 100 different platforms, what he's doing is he's saying is the more platforms you're on, the more options you have, right? And in my opinion, in this day and age, if you're building a business if you're building a business of any kind, right? If you're selling a service or you're selling a product or anything in between, you probably need to be on multiple platforms, not just to get more exposure, but just to be more robust, right? So that way, if something happens to Facebook or Facebook blocks you and all of your clients are coming from Facebook, well, you're kind of fucked. But if you have an email list, you have a Snapchat following, you have a Twitter following, you have a YouTube following, you've got a podcast following. If you've got many different followings, you might not be very efficient, right? You might be wasting time and effort putting things out on different platforms, but that will make you more robust and possibly even anti-fragile, depending on what happens to you, whenever the time comes. And the idea is that you have options. It's all about having options. And this is why it's so important in this day and age. This is why it makes sense to me to also bring in another person that really resonated with Grant Cardone. I know he says some crazy wild shit sometimes, but whenever the message that resonated with me from him is he said, you need to get your money right. And it just falls in line with all of this, right? If you have 100 grand in the bank, 200 grand in the bank, if you've got a good savings, right? That doesn't mean you just sit on that for the rest of your life because, you're not going to live that long off 100 grand. But if you have a good amount of savings, it provides robust. It makes you robust to black swans. It makes you robust to big events that happen in your life, whether it be an illness or a family illness, or something happens to a vehicle, or you lose your job, or your business goes south. Something that a massive, unpredictable event happens. You want to be able to protect yourself against it. The only way you can protect yourself against it is to be able to have options, right? And you can only have options if you have provided yourself with those resources, whether that be in the case of the financial world, that would be money. You need to have money. You need to have savings. You need to figure out how to do it. Now, another way you could be robust would be to have, in the physical realm, obviously, I talked about this last podcast, would be to have like maybe some guns, ammunition, food, water, not for the end of the world, not for doomsday, not for martial law, but for a chaos event that happens in your town. Whether you live in an earthquake-prone area, a hurricane area, a tornado-prone area, you need to always be ready. So having supplies for backup and having money for backup makes you robust. It gives you options, right? So once a hurricane hits and I've got a backup supply of food and water and I've got all these things, I have options. I can make decisions. I can decide what things I want to do. Now, I've beat that idea to death. Something else interesting I'm gaining from listening to Anti-Fragile was Taleb talked about making decisions is a little easier than we think, and that you don't have to be right. And he talks about this with intelligence. He's like, listen, you don't have to be that smart in this world, right? You don't. You just need to have options. You need to have optionality. And I was like, oh, wow, that makes sense, right? Like you don't need to be a genius in order to be fine. You just need to be able to, when something bad happens, you need to be able to be in a position to decide something. Okay, instead of the event happening to you and having no control over it, right? That's an example of when the system collapses. If I have no money in my savings account and I have an emergency, I lose my job, then I am fucked, right? Like say I'm paying for an apartment, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, I've got debt, I've got car debt, this, that, and the other. I lose my job and I don't get one quick enough, then I start losing shit, right? Got to get out of the apartment. Maybe I got to sell the car. So that is not having options. You're out of options. Now you just got to start getting rid of shit. Now you got to start running, right? You don't want to do that. Same thing with food provisions or water provisions in case of a disaster, an emergency. Same thing is you don't have those backups. You don't have the options. You're done. So Taleb talks about how the most important decisions you can make are just making sure you are robust to black swans, which means you have optionality, I think. And everything else, small shit. And I'm like, wow, that is so true. See, for me, I've talked a lot on this podcast about my anxieties, right? About like I worry, am I going to be successful? Am I going to achieve the things I want to achieve? I worry about that constantly, right? I worry like, am I going to, as somebody who's in my mid to late 20s now, I've got plenty of time, but, as a guy in this current environment, you wonder like, am I going to find a woman I'm compatible with? But, making some lifestyle changes I've chilled out a little bit, and then listening to things like Nassim Taleb say this, basically, when I started thinking in terms of getting my shit together, in terms of becoming more robust, it started to make more sense to me, right? Because it's like, okay. If I am robust against catastrophe, then I feel better, right? It's like, okay, that's what was so attractive to me about, like I said, how I'm moving in with a relative. I'm going to rent a room from a relative. I'm going to, get out of my more expensive apartment, move in with a relative, how I am experimenting with different ways to save money, and how that's a really big priority of mine right now. Been trying to figure out, like, what can I do to improve my life? And that was an important part. Trying to get my money right so I can be more robust. And ever since I've been making those changes, I have felt more at ease. And it's because, simply put, I have more options. I can do more things. I can make decisions with my time and my money now. So Anyway, and I know the Gary Vee thing was maybe just kind of a quick overrun, but that is something that I've been thinking about with Gary because he is involved in many different business ventures. Oh, the other thing is about luck, right? That's the other thing is when Gary Vee talks about putting out material, a lot of times he talks to rappers and he says, listen, you got to just pump out material, right? You got to pump out material because if anyone's no one's going to find you if you're keeping all of your material, to yourself, or no one's going to ever read your articles if they're never written. Now, you could write all your articles and never become famous, right? I mean, you could do that, but you are not exercising the things that could potentially bring you to the next level. Anyway, I actually think that maybe that is a conversation for another day. It's kind of on a different tangent, but this was more about how, I think that, I think it is the ability to become robust is extremely important. And I think that that's an important part of what Gary Vee talks about when he talks about basically being everywhere and trying out different things, right? That's part of trying out different things as well is, you're giving yourself options, right? If you are, maybe you're a SoundCloud rapper, but you're also a blogger, but you're also trying social media, what you're doing is you're putting out options. And if one of those starts to take off, you can exercise your decision to say, oh, I'm going to go with this one, right? Like if you're a blogger, you're a SoundCloud rapper, and you're like a Facebook marketer and your SoundCloud raps start like really blowing up, you now have the option to decide, do I want to continue down this path or do I want to do marketing, right? Like you have those options. So basically doing more things, while yes, it can spread you more thin, can also provide you with more options, can make you more robust. So yeah, I think that's all I got to say for now. And thank you very much for tuning in. Peace. Hey guys, have you heard about Anchor? You probably have. In fact, you may have heard about it just before you're hearing about it now. But I want to tell you guys, I have been using Anchor to make my podcast for a little while now, and I really like it. They have lots of different things we can do. So what is it exactly? What do they provide? Well, for one, obviously it's free. They have a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. I've had to use this multiple times. You make a podcast, you want to edit some stuff out, you can use their tool directly from the app or in the computer. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other platforms. This is one of the best things that I like about Anchor, is that they automatically distribute your podcast to different platforms all over the internet. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello, children of the corn. Hello, people out there who tune into this podcast broadcast. If you're crazy enough, if you're insane enough, I have been, as some of you may know, some of you may not know, I am on this constant quest of self-improvement, trying to improve myself physically, mentally, financially, everything. And that's kind of what I'm doing here, is taking whoever's listening on this, taking you along on this journey of mine, per se. Along with extra bullshit thoughts that I throw out here on occasion. I have noticed some trends here. So I am going to talk about some similarities, some overlap, what I see between Gary Vaynerchuk, and Nassim Taleb. So some of you have noticed that I am on a huge Taleb kick lately. I'm listening to his book, Anti-Fragile, which is just so awesome. It is so awesome. I just can't praise it enough. Anyway, there's a concept that he talks about called optionality, and that concept very basic and simple, probably intuitively understood, overlaps with Gary V's kind of the way Gary V hits on things. Then hopefully I'll remember to go over some things about decision making that I'm gaining from this book. So listening to Anti-Fragile, I've understood now more what optionality meant. In the past, when I hear people say, you know, oh, I just want to have options, blah, 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 it's like, yeah, you kind of get it, right? Like, yeah, you want to have options. You want to be able to, I don't know, turn right, turn left, buy something you want to buy. And so I understand now what Nassim Taleb talks about when he talks about optionality. That from what I believe when he talks about being robust and anti-fragile to black swan events, the only way you can do that is to have optionality, which means to have decision-making abilities in the face of events, big events, right? So that means when, whether it be a financial event, maybe it's a health event. Let's put it this way. Let's assume that I have 200 grand in the bank. I'm living by myself. Say I've got no debt, right? And I fall ill with something, or, my car gets totaled. Say I have regular basic insurance, I don't know, whatever. Let's say I fall ill and I initially have to pay out of pocket, right? A lot of money. If I have 200 grand in the bank, I'm robust because I have options. I can make decisions here. All right. If I can figure out ways to make the payments, I can pay all at once. I'm robust to the event in that I have a way to deal with the event. I have an option. I have a way to deal with the event. This is how I'm interpreting this. Okay. Similarly, what I've talked about, I think yesterday or the last podcast was also, it would be like if you lose your job and you get a better job, right? Or if you have a better job waiting and then you quit, or something happens and you get fired and you walk right into a job that pays even more, right? You have an option, right? The option allowed you to be anti-fragile. In terms of the, for the example about the job, say you're making 100 grand a year. Somebody says, hey man, just to let you know, I have a job opening for you because I know what you can do and I'll pay you 200 grand a year. But you're afraid to leave your job. But then the next day you get fired, okay? That's a black swan event. Like it's unexpected. You've never been fired. Then you get fired, but then you immediately walk into a better job because there was an option there. The option allowed you to become anti-fragile in that you got more upside than downside. Now, being robust would be you get fired and you have 200 grand in the bank, you have no debt, and you're a young guy, you've got 200 grand in the bank, you have no debt, and you are fine. You just look for another job. That's robust, right? But you have options in these situations. So